More than any other art form, cinema's development has been shaped by constant technological development. Today we're looking at the inventions that have most impacted movies as we know them. These are our picks for the top 3 technological innovations in film history. We think the obvious place for us to start looking for important tech is in the camera itself. People like Edward Muybridge took us from flip books to real-life image capture, first by stringing up multiple cameras in rapid succession and then attaching multiple lenses to a single body, before narrowing in towards the single-lens, single-body camera model that dominates all non-Matrix films to this day. But right before we got there, camera development basically halted. Not because we didn't have the tech or the know-how to open up an aperture a couple dozen times per second, but because we didn't yet have the tech for what to open it up on. Which brings us to what we think is the first most important invention in the history of cinema, the invention of celluloid film stock in 1888.
Je te suis pas. De quoi parlons-nous?
De remplir le cinéma nazi et de le détruire par le feu.
Moi, je ne parle pas de ça. C'est toi qui parles de ça.
Non, 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 non. Nous parlons de ça là, maintenant. Et avec la collection de 350 films nitrates de Madame Mimieux, on n'aurait même pas besoin d'explosifs. Si?
As it turned out, capturing the approximately 24 images per second needed to create the illusion of movement is really demanding on the photographic medium. Not only does it need to move through a camera at approximately 90 feet per minute, but it has to make each frame-size movement in 1/48th of a second and come to a complete stop before the shutter opens every time. Photography had existed since about 1839 on copper, on paper, and most notably on glass, but none of these worked for motion pictures for longer than a few seconds. It took the invention of the very earliest of the plastics to do the trick. Enter celluloid. Invented in 1855 as a synthetic ivory replacement for manufacturing cheap billiard balls, celluloid proved to be the perfect combination of bendy, strong, and moldable necessary to embed a photographic emulsion that eventually brought us to where we are today. Amidst dozens of competing claims for the first camera, there is really only one celluloid nitrate. Since then, the earliest film stock has given way to faster, more sensitive emulsions. The invention of color processes has moved away from traditional celluloid to something slightly less flammable, and most recently begun to disappear completely in favor of the digital sensor. But it all began just 140 years ago in an attempt to kill fewer elephants. First few decades after the invention of film saw vast progression on all fronts. In cameras, moving from cranked to motorized, lenses, faster and with less aberration, and lighting, moving through mercury vapor tube lights to the carbon arc. But after the creation of cinema, there is little doubt in our minds that the next most tectonic shift in film technology involved the introduction of sound. But while Don Juan and especially the jazz singer are heralded as landmark turning points, they were actually dead ends technologically. But our second pick, optical sound, is what really took cinema to its next level.
It's just a toy.
It's a screen.
It's vulgar.
RF, do you think they'll ever really use it?
I doubt it. The Warner Brothers are making a whole talking picture with this gadget. The jazz singer. They'll lose their shirts. What do you think of it, Dexter?
It'll never amount to a thing.
Yeah, that's what they said about the horseless carriage.
The idea of talkies has been with movie technology almost since it began, with many of the same inventors as were making the cameras trying to find a way to tie sound in too. But it turns out it's really hard to get phonograph audio on wax to record and play back at the exact same speed as separately recorded strips of film. Eventually, engineers solved the persnickety synchronization problem in just about the exact way you, me, and MacGyver would probably try first, by attaching the film camera motor to the phonograph motor with gears and pulleys and stuff. Warner Brothers picks it up, and what do you know? Sound is a hit. The only problem is, apart from being really obvious, the Rube Goldberg sync solution had a bunch of problems, not the least of which was the complete inability to edit the audio together with cuts at all. A real, useful, scalable solution would mean recording sound onto an editable medium like film, but that would mean converting sound vibrations into light. Fortunately, Warner Brothers going all in on the wrong tech convinced the other big movers like Fox, RCA, and United Artists to invest in the right one, and quickly, each developing their own slightly different but incredibly clever way to convert vibrations into light waves. United Artists used a Western Electric system that had sound drive a vibrating pair of metallic ribbons in front of a slit to modulate a light's intensity. RCA developed the photophone system, which used a sound-sensitive galvanometer to steer the orientation of a tiny mirror to paint more traditional-looking waveforms. And Fox developed Movietone, a gas tube-based technology that modulated its glow via sound, and in multiple ways at once, the soundtrack was born. Within 15 months, the entire industry had converted entirely to talkies. And while the aesthetic effect of the new technology was initially quite restrictive, locking the camera into a static soundproof shed and hiding a mic in a plant for the actors to talk straight into, it was only a few short years before things had loosened back up and headed toward a new stylistic future. Before sound, film was graphic, it was representational, it was abstracted from life in the same way as a painting or a photograph. After sound, film took a huge step away from representational towards experiential. Moving pictures no longer just showed you an image of life, they really were starting to seem like it, which set film on a course of immersion and realism that continues to this day. The sound era gave way to important post-production advances, such as the flatbed, the edit system that unlocked creative picture and sound editing potential, and optical printing that paved the way for the entirety of visual effects forever. But we want to look even further post-production, because cinema's storied history of technological achievement is not just one of image and sound capture, but also image and sound playback. In the early days, this took the form of arcade-like cabinets called kinetoscopes that individuals peered into one at a time to watch short novelty pieces. Before the Lumiere brothers came along and ran their camera backwards with a lamp behind it to throw images onto a flat surface in front of a crowd in better and better conditions. A man named Lee DeForest invented a thing named a triode vacuum tube that Western Electric commercialized into the first ever audio amplification system that would go on to allow audiences to actually hear the sounds studios were so keen on syncing up. But it was a different vacuum tube that infiltrated American homes in the late 1940s that ironically had the next biggest influence on the silver screen after sound. We are, of course, talking about the CRT TV.
Screw it! It's television! Yes!
First TVs date back to the 1920s, where a quickly spinning mechanical disc with a spiral pattern of holes would scan by an image line by line in order to capture its brightness, where another spinning disc in front of a synchronized light would replicate that pattern of brightness line by line fast enough to look like a single image. It was called the mechanical TV, and much like sound on disc, it wasn't really going anywhere. But a few engineers and an American farmer all simultaneously converged on a design that would make the final leap. They used cathode ray tubes to shoot electrons of varying amounts at a phosphor screen that would glow when they hit it. They could guide its path with something called steering coils that pointed its beam along a familiar line-by-line pattern, and that is how they invented TV. It's hard for most people under the age of 70 to imagine just how magical and special the cinema was before the invention of television. Far before videotape and DVDs and smartphones and Netflix, there was quite literally no other way to watch a moving picture beyond the movie theater. So the introduction of TV had two humongous unintended consequences on the film industry. First, with competition in the moving picture business for the very first time, film studios began to take dramatic steps to carve out a niche for themselves that was, for lack of a better word, even more cinematic. TV screens were small, black and white, and blurry, so movies played to their strengths and did things TV couldn't. They got wider, developing Cinerama, Todd AO, and CinemaScope. They got more colorful, finally bringing about the mass adoption of the already existing color film technology. And they got gimmicky, setting off the first wave of 3D films and the only wave of smell-o-vision, thank God. But the second effect was even more consequential. Viewership dropped and never recovered. In 1944, over 60% of America went to the theaters at least weekly. By 1960, it was heading down to around 10. Hollywood went from producing 500 films a year to about 150. Combine lower numbers with flashier films and you wander yourself into a world where studios attempt to build their years around a few major tentpoles that they try to drive everybody to at once. That small box of electron beams is the very reason Hollywood entered the blockbuster era, and why we're still in it today. And we don't know what will be the next big break that changes cinema forever, but we do think the most important ones so far, the flexible celluloid film strip, the optical recording of sound, and the mass-produced CRT television, have had permanent, important, and perceptible effects on the history, economics, and aesthetics of an entire art form. So, what do you think? Disagree with any of our picks? Did we leave out any of your favorite cinema inventions? We not talk enough about smell-o-vision? I knew we should have talked more about smell-o-vision. Oh well. Let us know in the comments below and be sure to subscribe for more CineFix movie lists.